So I'm going to start with growing mushrooms on stumps and on logs as part of the permaculture model that I discussed earlier, or if you just want to stick with growing mushrooms outside without considering it to be a part of the permaculture model, then you can just go for it. So growing mushrooms on logs or stumps now depends very much if you're considering from the point when you inoculate these stumps until the point where you get the results, when you see the mushrooms popping and growing from that log, for example. There's a time range for that, and that time range depends very much on the inoculation points. Let's say that you have a 4-foot long log, for example, and you want to inoculate that. Now you can use between 30 and 50 inoculation points on a log like this. Also, for example, if you're going to use only 20 inoculation points, then it's going to take a longer time for it to get fully colonized. But also, if you're going to use 50 inoculation points, then you're going to get faster results. Depends also on the type of the mushroom that you want to grow, because some mushrooms are slower colonizers while some other ones are quicker colonizers. Let's say comparison between maitake, which is a slow growing mushroom, and oyster mushroom. Oyster mushroom is quite fast. So if you're taking the same type of log for maitake, that log with the same inoculation points and the same condition and so on, it's going to take way more time until it's going to get fully colonized. And also depends very much on the wood type that you're going to use, because some wood types take more time to colonize if you're considering the same species, and some other ones takes less. Like, let's say oak, for example, takes more time because the wood is denser, and if you're comparing it to conifers, for example, which they have a soft wood, that's the opposite actually for the same species. Let's say that you're going to grow Pleurotus pulmonarius, that it's an oyster mushroom that grows on conifers too. So in that case, you're going to see that this type of wood is getting decomposed, or it's fully colonized way faster than oak. What else I want to tell you? So what's the procedure on growing mushrooms on logs? The procedure is quite simple. You need to use an inoculum, which can be sawdust inoculum, and I would encourage you to use that, or you can use just plug spawn. This is how it's called. It's just mycelium that it's grown on wood chips or wood plugs. I wouldn't encourage you to use grain spawn, because grain can get moldy, or maybe you'll have some insects playing with it and stuff. They're attracted to that kind of inoculum. So just simply plug spawn or sawdust or wood chips. The holes should be like 2 to 3 inches apart, or 2 to 5, depending on the size of the log. Another thing to consider is that when you're going to inoculate these logs, you want to do this in the before the log starts to leaf, because that's the point when the sugars inside the log are concentrated, and those sugar will be very good for mushrooms to thrive on it, and the mycelium to colonize it. So you shouldn't try to grow mushrooms on dried logs, because you need moisture. You know, they need moisture in order to colonize that log. So if they don't have that moisture, then your project might not get successful. So what else? Also, you know, avoid inoculating these logs in the summertime, because summer, it's known to, you know, you don't have the right conditions. These logs should be in a moist place and kind of protected place from the harsh winds, and so you don't want to lose moisture in the from those logs. So that's why I would encourage you to to inoculate them in the spring or late fall. What else? Make sure that you don't you know, make any holes on the sides, even though that here you can see that I placed some holes. I want to tell you that the bark of the stump, in this case, it can protect the inner core of the wood, and that's a protection against other type of fungi or some insects and beetles and all of that. And this is important because you don't want other fungi to take over your project. And when you go up there to check on your mushrooms, you'll see that some other kind of mushrooms are growing on them. For stumps, I would make sure that they're freshly cut if you go in the woods, and it's a way much better to grow medicinal mushrooms on a stump like that, if you'll see it, than to just let that stump be taken over by some other mushrooms like Armillaria melea, the honey mushroom, or Heterobasidion anosum. These are some of the most damaging mushrooms for living trees, and they also grow as saprophytes, not only as parasites. So they can spread very easily from one tree to the next neighbor tree. So if you see stumps in the woods and you really want to grow medicinal mushrooms on them, or any kind of mushrooms that are edible and you want to have them, then you can go for inoculating those stumps. Now it's simple. You just put the plug spawn in there or the wood chip, and once you make those holes with a drill, and then you seal them up with cheese wax, beeswax, soy wax, even silicone. I heard people that they were using silicone, but that's synthetic. I wouldn't go for that because you need something more natural. So then you can seal this whole part here, and that way you can make sure that some other fungi spores, even if they land on it, they're not going to start to get inside. Because see, if those other fungi spores that are in the wood, for example, if they land on that piece of wood which is not sealed, in that case, what can happen is, in presence of moisture and right temperature, they can germinate, and if they're faster colonizers than the desired mushroom that you want to grow on them, then they will take over, and you might get still your mushrooms, but probably that fungus, it's going to be the one who's going to utilize most of the stump. And that happens pretty much with your logs as well. That's why you need to make sure that you're going to protect them. See, for example, here you can put your stump somewhere in a shady and moist place, but you have to make sure that it doesn't has a straight contact with the soil. Especially when it's not fully colonized. You know, when it's fully colonized, then there's no problem, you know. Some other mushrooms won't take it over. But when it's not colonized, then you have to make sure that it doesn't touch the soil. And you have to find a good location for that log. Always pick a location which is kind of shaded, which is able to retain moisture, and it's protected against strong winds. And in some cases you can use, in most cases I would say, just to make sure that your log keeps that moisture over the dry season, you can place the log in the sand. You know, you can, for example, you can have a plastic foil that's going to function as protection against other fungi that are in the soil to get into your log and to colonize it, to take over. So you can use a plastic foil, and then you can place sand over it, and then you can get part of your log inside. And you can do that this way, the vertical or a horizontal log, and you can bury pretty much up to half the size of the log in the sand, and you can keep that sand moist. This means that once you inoculate those logs, then you can if you see that the season is too dry, and this depends very much where is your location. If it's in California, for example, Southern California, then you have to make sure that these logs are kept wet. This means that you have to sprinkle them from time to time, but mostly you have to pay attention on the sand, and you can wet up the sand, and that way the log is going to have the right amount of moisture. Also, in order not to lose moisture, you can cover this log with a tarp, for example, and that's going to keep the moisture inside the log. Once you have your logs, then you can place them like this, crisscross, one on the top of each other like that, or you can put them just like that. You can build a simple stand like that, and then you can just line them up like that with some space in between them, just because they need oxygen as well. Now, if you're thinking about inoculation, there are several methods. You can just go straight for making holes into those logs, and you can also have two pieces of your log. For example, this is your whole log. You cut it in half, and then you just inoculate the inner sides here, and then you just put them on top of each other, and that's it. Or you can use a disc, and this is the disc method. You can inoculate only the disc, and then you can put just the two pieces of your log in between, and that's going to be it. Or you can use a different method. You can just take a little piece of the log, you can inoculate that, and you can place it back against the rest of the log. Well, now the time that is going to take from the inoculation point until you will see the first results could be even up to 2 years. So depending on the mushroom that you want to grow, depending on the wood type, depending on how many holes did you put in there, depending on the competition, if you're placing a kind of protective layer, and depends on also on the moisture. For example, if your log is going to lose moisture, then that's it, you know. Without moisture they don't function properly. So depends on some factors. So what can you grow? You can grow a lot of kind of mushrooms that are known to decompose wood. Now if you want to go, you can go for conifers. You can grow on conifers reishi mushroom, turkey tails, chicken of the woods, lion's mane, Pleurotus pulmonarius, which is a kind of oyster mushroom. Not every kind is going to grow on conifers. Sparasis crispa, which is the cauliflower mushroom, for example, and some other ones. But those mushrooms, they will also grow on hardwoods. But if you're picking like to grow maitake, then just make sure that you're not going to put that on conifers, because conifers, they have a kind of sap. It has this resin inside, and that resin, it's a protection for that type of wood. It has antifungal properties and antibacterial properties. So what you can do also, you can try to grow 2 species on the same log. For example, you can use a white rot fungus like the common oyster, and you can use brown rot fungus like the chicken of the woods. And guess what? You'll get mushrooms, but the log is going to be decomposed by both of them. And actually, you know, the log is composed of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. So in the white rot mushroom case, they will decompose the lignin, and what you'll have left is going to be the cellulose. So in that case, the wood is just going to be very fibrous and a little bit spongy, while in the brown rots, they will decompose the cellulose, and the lignin is going to be left in there. So what you see is just you know, what remains in the wood is just kind of cubical kind of shape, which is hard, quite hard, and probably you've seen some kind of decomposed trees in the woods. So that's what happens. But in a final point, what you're going to be left with is just going to turn into soil. And also, if you're going to consider beetles and some other insects in there, then yeah, that's going to be recycled in the woods or in the soil where you place your logs. You can also build a kind of protection if you really want to for your log, just to make sure that it's not in the direct sunlight. What else? Yeah, once your logs are fully colonized, then you'll have to induce fruiting. And how you do that is by soaking your logs in underwater. You can keep them for several days. And this is how you induce fruiting. Or you can wet them up really well, and then they will start to fruit. Or you can wait for 2 or 3 rainy days, and then they will start to fruit. And once you pick your mushrooms off of it, then you can keep those logs for up to 10 weeks, and then you can submerge them again underwater, and then they will fruit again. And this can happen for like depending on the season and climate and all of that. Logs like this, they can fruit up to 6 years if you want, in between 4 and 6 years, and depends very much on what kind of mushroom are you growing, and also on the density of the wood. For example, in oak, you can pick mushrooms for 4 years, 5 years, even 6 years on some mushrooms. But if you're going to use alder, then maybe that log is going to last the same size of log. It's going to last for the same mushroom 2 years. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I hope you understand the whole thing about the about growing mushrooms on logs. And this is a labor-intensive method of growing mushrooms, and I would say that it's not something that you really want to get into if you want to sell your mushrooms. But if you want to play around, you know, just to have some mushrooms for yourself and your family, that's different. This doesn't mean that you have to cut half of the forest. And the output or the yield that you'll get is going to be way lower than what you would get when you're going to grow mushrooms indoors in controlled environments. Yeah, so this is the first point of the permaculture model. And if you remember, I showed you that up on the hill you can make a kind of mushroom patch. You can have at the base crisscrossed logs, or like this, and in that case the water that comes off the hill, it's going to keep the logs moist, especially if you put sand in there, and which is a very powerful connection because you don't even need to water them so often. Yeah, so depends very much where you put them. And next I'm going to talk about how to grow mushrooms in the garden, and let's dive into that.